All right, it's on Monday, October 30th. This is an end of the day SPY recap, first day of the week. You can see here we ended up with a 2-up bar, a little green bar that kind of held above the midpoint of the prior day and moved higher. We didn't quite reach our target. The 2-up bar should have, broadened out above this Thursday high. We might get that in compound fashion here. 1, 2, maybe by tomorrow, if we hold above the midpoint of today, we head up there and take out that target. That's the expectation until proven otherwise. It also sets up a potential failure scenario where we kind of get the 2 up, doesn't reach our target. So any kind of 2 down would be exciting to get short and get back in line with the bigger picture continuity, which is to the downside on the weekly chart. And I drew this little box in here because there was a bad tick and I didn't want it. It looks like we took out that low already, but we really didn't. This is what the weekly chart looks like. A little inside green bar at the moment, but given this big red bar, you kind of expect those lows to be tested some point this week. So if we get a daily signal now that gets a 2 down, type of a move, and we'll see how the open and the pre-market range sets up for that, then, we could be, there's the next target, which gets even more exciting, that you didn't get the target on the upside first. So that's very similar to this scenario where we had the 2 up, didn't reach its target. Once you got the 2 down, we were coming down, in more high probability to the next target. So we'll see if that unfolds for tomorrow. But in the meantime, as long as we hold the midpoint of this bar, we could be continuing up a little bit within this downtrend, and we'll just have to see how high things want to go before reversing. In terms of today, it was a little bit of tricky, conditions in the sense that we were gapping up a little bit. The pre-market range was between the blue lines, and actually there was a bit of a gap. If the early pre-market action was based on the after hours from yesterday or on Friday, and then we gapped up a little bit today. So there was kind of a big gap in here that I discussed on a video when I bought some puts. I'll mention that in a minute. But it was kind of a wide range, and what happened was out of the gates we had the 15-minute chart go up pretty strongly, and I shot a video why I actually bought the 5-minute breakout instead of waiting for the 15, because I wanted to see given that I'm going against continuity. I had a feeling that this type of thing could, you're heading up on the 15-minute chart, you're buying it higher should it break out, and then your risk becomes greater. Here, if I just buy it on that 5-minute opening and I immediately fail, I can get right out and then see how the 15-minute bar forms. Anyway, it was just my decision. Sometimes when I see a pre-market range here that gets broken out with a strong 5-minute bar, I buy that 5-minute and just see how the 15-minute unfolds. In this case, it unfolded with a big green bar that did follow through. And so for me, I was able to scale out up here. And once it came back to the halfway point of that bar, I took a small gain on the trade, versus if I would have bought it here on the 15-minute breakout, I would have had to take a small loss. Anyway, then once, price failed on bar 3, I shot a video how not only did I exit the calls, bought some puts thinking maybe we get a failure. But to get a failure, I knew we were going to have to get to the midpoint of the prior day, which was kind of into this gap. But what you had here was the target of the first bar low and this little pre-market low. Like I said, this was like kind of a pivot point in this overall range, and price did get down there. And I decided, again, to scale out at this point, knowing that we didn't quite have the failure confirmed until we got below the midpoint of that prior day. So that, you'd have to kind of know the context when you kind of enter these trades. Are you going to be aggressive or more conservative about the potential for follow-through? So I thought the potential for follow-through on the upside was potentially limited, and I actually thought the potential on the downside might be limited. And as it turns out, both unfolded. If you did buy puts here, you definitely had, could have, it did come up, made one little pullback, then started down again. So maybe on this bar, you would have broken even if you didn't scale out. If you did scale out, you can have a little gain. Or if you're watching it, at this point, you're judging how do things get back to that high of that day. So you're not necessarily expecting it to kind of head to the highs up here of the day, just given the fact you've already broken through the first bar low. But you did take out a little pivot here, and then you started lower again. At this point, once you were kind of trying to make your real secondary push down, which I see these 3 bars doing, and you failed and you had the 2 up, that was, number one, it was a definite time to exit any trade you got short here early. Number 2, it's kind of a condition where you kind of have a daily bias up, given you're above the midpoint of the prior day. You're failing on the second push down to go lower. So there is some validity to buying calls here to see if you will want to attack this little high and maybe get to the highs of the day. That's what happened. I'm not saying it's a crystal clear trade, but it was something logical based on the way, again, I look for one pushes down and two pushes. And if two pushes don't make it to a target within an overall up condition above the midpoint of the prior day, that could be a buy signal in my, pretty simple methodology, the way I judge the 15-minute chart. It ended up going up for most of the day, took out the first bar high, and then, that first intraday high, and then, tailed off a little bit at the end. But it's definitely green for tomorrow, so I could see it trying to probe up to that target. We'll find out if that happens. And again, it's not always, it's not always crystal clear, or it's not so much crystal clear, but there's not always, very good opportunities for trading, given that you're in a bit of a, exhaustion risk to the downside, and the up moves are going to be choppy, and yet the down moves, you're above the midpoint of the prior day. So that's why it's a little tricky scenario, but you shouldn't have gotten hurt too bad. Even if you just took a loss here on your first trade and you didn't do anything for the rest of the day, that's just the way it goes sometimes. So I'm not saying it was an easy day in terms of opportunity, but, it also wasn't a day you should have gotten hurt too bad. And to me, I think the logic here was that, like I said, the upside follow through I thought would be tricky, even though we ended up going up a little bit. And I think the downside follow through was a bit of conflict, given that you're above the midpoint of the prior day. So that's what happens sometimes. We'll wait for things to, align a little better as the week goes on, and, and see how this week ends up. I mean, somewhere along the line, there'll be some good days, I'm sure, very crystal clear directional movements. But for today, that wasn't the case. But again, the good news is probably you shouldn't gotten hurt that bad if you were kind of focused on the SPY. So we'll see what develops tomorrow and for the rest of the week.